and welcome in to another episode of Heat of the Moment. My name is Micah. I'm joined, as always, by my fellow host and friend, Lino. Heat Nation, we got another episode for you. Can't promise it's not going to get off to a great start and then fall apart, just like our favorite team, but we're going to try and make it work. So if you're a Heat fan, which that's probably the only people that be listening to this. We know you're probably frustrated right now. We are too. We're going to mostly be discussing the struggles this team has been facing over this recent stretch, what we think could be done to change them. Not a lot of news and notes to get into. The Khalil Ware injury was the biggest piece of news, and he was back in that last game against Chicago. So no real issues there. I think, Lino, we can kind of get into it just to cover where the Heat are since the last episode. They're 3-4, a lot of close losses over that span. They're 14th in net rating, 16th in offense, 12th in defense. So pretty mediocre overall in that stretch. They played some good teams, they played some bad teams, some mixed results. Start 30,000 feet view. What kind of trends have you seen from the team recently?
There's been a trend of losing. It's probably the biggest trend, which is unfortunate because I'd love it if we won more basketball games. Overall, this team, I think, big picture, has struggled late in games to just close out games. I'm not a guy who gets up in arms about losing leads. Like, this is the NBA. Unless you are a top team, like first, second seed team, dominant team, like you're going to blow leads. Almost every team does. It doesn't really matter. My friend Aaron loves to casually watch basketball during the playoffs and hates watching regular season basketball. And his number one thing is there's just no point in watching a game in the first quarter. Like, nothing that happened in the first quarter is going to matter by the fourth quarter. You could be up 20 and then the game is a 5-point game by the fourth. So blowing leads is not, the biggest red flag for me. Blowing leads late is an issue, of course, but what we do at the end of close games matters the most to me, and that's where the biggest concern comes from. I think across the board, regardless of anybody's performances, I think we've seen some people have great games, some people have really, troubling games across this stretch, but overall, everybody seems to be playing a little bit worse when it comes to the fourth quarter. And I feel like in general, we keep getting away from the things that put us in good positions to win. And that has a lot to do with the players. I think it does have a lot to do with the coaching. But overall, I think it has a lot to do with confidence, discipline, and just effort there at the end of these games.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we can see some of those things turn around and we can get into, some of the individual performances, of course. But big picture, I think no matter who's doing well and who's doing bad, when these games are close, it really just comes down to making the right decisions on a night-to-night basis. But Micah, what have you been seeing, and kind of what is your main 3,000-foot takeaway from
Yeah,
this stretch?
it's been tough. So our last episode was the offense episode, right? We talked about everything from like coaching staff changes we want to different kind of sets that could be helpful. And the very next day, I believe, the very next game was the Heat's offensive explosion against Atlanta. They score
Mhm.
131 points. I think they shot almost 50% from three, I believe. It was unbelievable. And I was like, okay, this is kind of that positive regression we were hoping for. They were shooting so poorly in February from three. Now it's coming back. And to be fair, these last 7 games in that stretch, the Heat are 11th in 3-point percentage. They're shooting about 40% from three. It's as much as you could hope for, but they're only 3-4 in that stretch. And a lot of those games, it seems like the Heat, not that this is anything to really make a diagnosis off of, but these games the Heat are losing, if they shoot 40% from three, so does the other team. Like, I remember that Indiana game that they were able to win, maybe the best win of the season, or at least this for this new version of the team. I think both teams shot 40% from three. So it's not
Mhm.
like Miami can just shoot well and win. The other team, they have to have a shooting advantage. Same thing last night with the loss to Chicago, which we'll talk about. I think both teams were around 30% from three. So
Mhm.
when they don't have that advantage there, it's hard for them to generate advantages on offense. But I think the clutch discussion is something to look into. I think, a lot of people feel differently about this. I'm of the mindset that, and for people that don't know, the NBA defines clutch as within the last 5 minutes. And I think it's a one possession game or within 5 points, something like that. So close game down the stretch. And to me, I think most of the time those are a coin flip. Now, it might not be over a whole season. Like, you might have a really good clutch season. The Heat have actually had some really good clutch seasons, and then I think like 2020 they were very clutch, and then 2021 they weren't very clutch at all. It just kind of, it's like the weather. You can't really control it. You kind of just have to ride with it. Except for a few key players in NBA history: LeBron James, Chris Paul, I think Tim Duncan, and Jokic are some of the only guys that have a really positive impact in the clutch. But what we do know is clutch minutes, at least more than any other minutes, we can be confident both teams have their best players out there. They're trying as hard as possible, and all the screws are tightened down. They're only using defensive coverages they know will work. They only have players out there they know will be effective. And honestly, the Heat have been really poor in the clutch by basically every metric. You can look at that from a team standpoint, or you can look at that from an individual player standpoint, but it has been rough. And,
Mhm.
we can get into that. I did. We are talking about this pre show, and this is kind of a sad stat, but the only Heat player with a positive like point differential in the clutch is Jimmy Butler for the season. It's everybody else is negative in net rating, so points scored per 100 possessions. Jimmy is a plus 2.2. The next best player is Duncan Robinson at negative 4.4.
Awesome.
So that is really tough. So why have the Heat been bad in the clutch? Their best players have not been very good. Tyler Hero, I believe, is shooting 28% in the clutch this year. That's just not great. And Tyler is as awesome of a season as he's had. A number one option in the clutch, you'd probably want somebody just a tier above him if you really want, to be super successful in these kind of situations. Bam, in his defense, he has shot 55% in the clutch, but on pretty low volume. We
2 shots per fourth quarter or something like that.
Yeah, so and that's another discussion is like, I don't know. Let me ask you this. So Tyler, I think of as a pretty clutch player in general. He's had a lot
Mhm.
of big shots in his career, but I think it's also might be fair to say the team relies too heavily on him in the clutch. What do you
Well,
think
here's the
about, what do you
here's the
think about that?
problem is that Tyler is very much a clutch shooter.
Mhm.
The problem is we get down to the stretch, get to down to the end, to the clutch section of the game, and there we're going to get to take maybe 12, 15 shots in that quarter, especially towards that latter end of the fourth quarter. The problem with Tyler is his most elite scoring tool that he likes to use, at best, has a 40% chance of going in. If he's doing his best and he's on fire and he's shooting well, there's still less than a coin flip that shot is going to go in. And so to have a clutch player that does not have an arsenal of scoring tools to make more like high efficiency scoring options, like he's actually gotten a lot better at getting towards the rim, his floater, his mid range. Like he's got tools, but those aren't the tools he likes to go to down the stretch. And so he likes to pull up from deep. And while he is one of the best at shooting that, even the best player at that range only making 40%. That's why when you talk about players like Jokic and LeBron, like the people who are the best at clutch, is because, their clutch shots aren't just them, pulling up from the wing. Like they're getting into the paint, getting toes in the paint and getting a shot at the rim or getting to the free throw line or like making something happen in that way. And that's just
Mhm.
not Tyler's style. And that's not a lot of players' style. But when that is our best scorer and that is kind of his go to, even when he gets a good, clean look, there's still only maybe a 42% chance that shot is going in, which just
Yes.
isn't good odds for how this goes.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction by you, because in the NBA, in the modern NBA at least, clutch time, maybe more than any other time during a game, is mismatch hunting time. It's, I'm taking my best offensive player, trying to get him on your worst defender, and he's going to work. And Tyler's gotten better at attacking mismatches, but a lot of that is usually predicated off physicality and strength. And Tyler's
Mhm.
offensive game is a lot more skill and, finesse based. And,
Yeah.
and I think that's why we see him maybe struggle more in these situations, and also why we see Bam maybe be more effective. I mean, Bam, when he's got that jumper going, which we'll talk about later, but he has been playing really high level offensive basketball lately.
Oh, yeah.
He's an issue because he's faster than a lot of big men, or he's stronger than a lot of wings you might want to put on him. So, Tyler, it's so tough because he can get to a contested mid range anytime he wants, and that's a pretty good shot for him. But
Hmm.
it also is a lot of times it feels like that's the best shot he can create. There were
Yeah.
shots down the stretch last night where I think he was ISOing on Tyus Jones, and he like did a couple dribble moves, kind of got stood up at the elbow, turned around, shot a super contested jumper, and made it. And it was like, that's
Yeah.
awesome, but that's also Tyus Jones. So it's like, can we not like get to the basket? And it's just,
Yeah.
and Wiggins, they did turn to Wiggins more in the clutch against Chicago last night, which I thought was
Hmm.
interesting. He had Giddy on him. He had a really strong take with less than 2 minutes left. And then he had a second one where there's a lot of contact at the rim, but didn't get the call. So maybe, Spo looks to go to Wiggins more in those situations. And it is worth noting, the Heat have struggled in the clutch this year, but they have especially struggled recently in the clutch. So
Yeah.
you don't want to react too much because, again, these things, a lot of it's just luck based. Did your shots go in? I mean, Giddy hit a dagger 28-foot three last night. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes it just doesn't go your way. But I think something that's representative of that, of guys that have played at least or like average 2 clutch minutes a game so far this season for the Heat, and net rating, three of the bottom four players are the new guys: Andrew Wiggins, Davion Mitchell, Kyle Anderson, and that's indicative too. It's just been a really big struggle because
Yeah.
the Heat have had exciting clutch wins. Tyler had that awesome game winner in Orlando. They even recently beat Indiana in that clutch game with some heroic shots from different guys. So, do you think the personnel we need to take a look at that? Are there certain players you think would help more in the clutch or just in fourth quarters and need more minutes that might help us not
Yeah.
blow
I
these
mean, I'd
leads?
love to just talk about the rotations in general. I mean, I was one of the last people standing on the Terry Rozier ship right next to Spo, but he has just gone too far. 12 minutes for Terry Rozier in the fourth quarter last night, by the way,
For anyone
which I
wondering,
think,
that's all of them.
yeah, every
That's the
second you could
most.
play in the fourth quarter, he played all of them. The only other guy to do that was Bam. You had Bam and Terry going at it together the whole fourth quarter. And, I know we're missing Jovic. I know, this is not exactly the ideal roster that we should have right now as far as like health is concerned. But I do think that I just don't like that when Terry's having a bad game, he gets to stay in, and when Terry has a good run, rather than letting that just be the good run, like okay, hey, you had a solid 5-10 minutes, like cool, let's get you out of there. You can feel good that you came in, had a positive impact. Your numbers are going to look great, and we can start to rebuild your reputation. Instead, he just lets him stay in there and
Yeah.
ruin all the goodwill that he may have built for himself when he starts getting going. Because the problem is, once Terry gets going, he's not going to stop shooting because once he makes those first two, he's going to shoot at least five more, which I understand because that's the style of player he is. But you have to pull the plug on that way earlier than that. We have to get some real on ball defenders in there. Spo talked a lot about the impact that Terry had during zone defense, which Spo's a much smarter guy than me. Most people are, especially when it comes to basketball. But I'm just going to say, I really don't know that Terry is having that much impact in a zone defense where you really kind of just pass the guy on to the next zone. Like,
Right.
there's not really a thing as far as being a good zone defender. Like, you could put
Yeah.
somebody else in there and they could probably
Well,
do it.
he often is playing over Davion, who it's like he would definitely be just as good in the zone. So it's like,
Yeah. And so, and I guess in that situation last night, it was like, I guess him or Duncan. And I think Duncan was not doing his best at a certain point in that game as far as shooting wise. But yeah, I don't know. These rotations are tough. I think we get put in these situations late where Spo doesn't have a lot of control over the pace of the game, whether it be limited timeouts or, he talked about, you know, we closed with Terry, I think, against Minnesota or Cleveland, and Davion Mitchell wasn't in there. And he talked about in the press conference how, Davion was at the scores table at 5 minutes and didn't get to go in because there wasn't a break in game for like another 2 or 3 minutes, which like these things happen. But at the same time, as a coach of your caliber, like I do think there is some level of control you have to have over the pace of the game. And whether that's timeout management, getting guys to generate more fouls so that you can get these guys in, like figuring something out so you can get the rotation in, or anticipating that this might be a while. So maybe don't, send Davion Mitchell to the scorer's table at 5 minutes, send him in at the 7 minute mark. Like there is just this idea that anything could happen, but we need to be, in control of when those things happen to the degree that we can. And so the rotations have been weird. What did you think about Ware not playing in the fourth down the stretch there?
In the Chicago game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was tough for me because honestly, I didn't think Ware was having a particularly great game,
Yeah.
but I didn't think there was someone that should clearly be playing over him. And Kalel, you know, it's tough to say. Every statistic, as far as looking at him on the court with Bam, still looks good, and it still looks like it's really positively impacting Bam. Now, obviously, Bam's been playing at such a high level; it doesn't matter who's out there. But this stretch seemed to really coincide with him playing more minutes with Kalel. And Bam has said on the record that, he doesn't have to do as much on defense with Kalel out there. He's not guarding every single pick and roll. And I think that would be important, even if you just want to say maybe Kalel plays the first 6 or 7 minutes of the fourth quarter, and three
Mhm.
or four of those are overlapping with Bam. But just that way, Bam, like you were saying, doesn't have to play the entire fourth quarter without any other big. That's a
Yeah.
lot to ask of him. And Spo talked about, I think after the Chicago game, he wasn't happy with his minutes in the first half, and he felt like guys were tired in the second half and down the stretch. And I think that's fair, and I think you gotta trust different guys. It also is worth mentioning, I should say, this is a multi-game conversation, but for the Chicago game specifically, Spo mentioned something that the training staff had a minutes restriction for Kalel that Spo apparently
Mm,
exceeded. So, he didn't have as many options as this game, but there have been several games where Kalel didn't close, like the Knicks game, where I thought, he really could have helped. So,
yeah.
yeah,
Especially there down the stretch. I definitely get, if there's health concerns, then, that's just that. But as far as just like the effect on the game, when you've got guys like Trey Jones getting to the paint and getting a bucket any way they want to, like Khalil has his items that he needs to work on. Like there's a lot of aspects of his game that he still needs to improve. Overall, I think he's doing a good job at improving with every game he plays. But at the very least, his presence out there as a rim deterrent is impactful.
Mhm.
As a rebounder is very impactful. And that was the one other big picture thing I wanted to talk about across the board for the Minnesota game, the Chicago game. Um, you mentioned what it takes to win in these clutch minutes is obviously having your best players out there going to the plays that are going to work both offensively and defensively, and then tightening the screws when it comes to execution. And we really lack in that third part and kind of the second part. Like we don't really get to the plays that work for us. We get very far away from the offense rhythm that we got to that point in the game with. And then we don't rebound particularly well. There's a lot of second and third shot opportunities that happen, particularly against the Timberwolves, but even against the Bulls, where it's like, man, that was a good stop if we could have just got a
Mhm.
board. And
That
when I
that
look, go
sorry,
ahead.
the OG Anunoby putback I've thought about pretty much every day since. Like it felt like that kind of won that game,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
and so just like that situation can just be backbreaking when you make that kind of stop. And when I went back and like I rewatched every fourth quarter from this week's games, with exception to the Wizards game, I went back just to see what the execution was like and seeing those offensive rebounds by the opponent. Like we don't even have a guy near the ball. Like people are kind of
Mhm.
already starting to get back. Nobody's crashing because the only person who's probably being drilled to crash the boards every single time is Khalil Ware, and he's not on the court anymore. So everybody else is kind of expecting Bam to do that, and that's crazy because Tyler, Terry are both relatively skilled rebounders. They just know where to be, on the court, but it was just not there for us in those games down the stretch when every single thing matters. And I wanted to just mention one last thing before we maybe get into some individual performances. I just feel like prior to this season, we had a reputation of even when we weren't good, if we dragged you into the mud of a close game, you're going to be pretty scared about losing to us. Because when we got to that situation, it was anybody's game. Whereas just over the past couple weeks, it feels like when we get into those situations, I have zero confidence that we're going to walk out of that game with a win. the team doesn't really look like a team that feels like they're going to win. And I feel like the energy and the effort and the intensity that we used to play with when things got close was something we actually lived for. Like close games used to actually be pretty fun for the Heat. Like we didn't really blow teams out before, but we used to crawl back into a game that maybe we didn't have any business winning. We used to walk out of there with a win, just be off of sheer force of will. And, that obviously involved different personnel at the time. But as far as that Heat culture that we talk about, that is one aspect of it that I feel has been missing over this
Hmm.
stretch of games, and particularly as we have tried to kind of really instill culture into this new roster.
Yeah, I'm with you, and it's tough because this isn't a good feeling. But I do think part of the difference is probably that we're able to get in these close games, and then we don't have a finisher, and that was Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy is a really good clutch player. He's good at getting the free throw line. He's good at attacking mismatches. I mean, that's a big deal. The Warriors won last night in a clutch game against the Pistons, and Jimmy had some big plays down the stretch, and it's not worth getting into because he's gone, but you don't have that like apex alpha type of guy to just make plays. I think this group is showing they can be in the clutch against good teams and bad teams, but
Yeah.
they're having a hard. They're just not going to as consistently finish because they're going to need to make jump shots, and that's just not something you can really count on. Um, but yeah, overall, I pulled up the lineup data from these past 7 games just to see kind of what's been working, what hasn't. I think this starting group is really good. And I
Puts us
don't,
in good positions all the time.
yeah, I wish we'd try closing with them. I wish we would have a look. And I like closing with Duncan. I hate that he's not in it, but you need Davion for defense. And then, like we talked about, we want Ware out there. You got to have Wiggins. So, but if you just the last 7 games, Wiggins, Adebayo, Hero, Mitchell, and Ware, they've only played in 2 of those together. And it's only been for 27 total minutes, but they're plus 19 net rating. Small sample size, obviously, but the defense is okay. The offense is awesome, which you haven't been able to say that about many Heat groups.
Yeah.
So I just think it's worth looking at. And then still for the season, the Bam Ware minutes are like a +3, which is
Mhm.
solid, and the defense is really good. And again, like we say +3, and it's like, yeah, if you compare that to a good Celtics lineup, it's not that good. But the Heat don't even have a positive net rating on the season. So +3 for the Heat is very impressive.
It's moving in the
So,
right direction for us finally.
and the other thing I'll say, this doesn't matter because the Heat don't think this way. But as a fan, the best case scenario for this year is to play in. So I'm like, if we're going to lose all these close games, why not get Ware close game reps? If for
Yeah.
nothing else, if for the future, like invest in him getting
Now,
attacked.
the thing is, you say that the Heat don't think this way, but I don't think it's counterintuitive to winning basketball to put Ware out there. Like I
I don't
if
either, but I'm just saying you can't lose. Like if you're
yeah.
looking at it from like either he's going to play well and we're going to win, or at least we develop him. But right now
Yeah.
they're saying like we're not putting him out there. We don't trust him, and then they're losing anyway. So it's like,
And then
well,
they're putting Terry Rozier out there and Kevin Love.
yeah,
They're like, yeah, we don't trust the rook, so we're gonna go with
yeah,
the 60-year-old guy and the
yeah.
guy who everybody seems to hate.
Yeah, and I I get the thought process. There's nothing Spo's doing where I'm like, I don't understand. Like, I get he's like he wants to play vets. He doesn't trust the rookie. I get he knows Terry historically has been a very clutch basketball player. Even last year had some really big clutch shots for the Heat. But I also know that hasn't been the case this year. He hasn't looked like the same guy. And even last night, I think he hit 5 threes. It's his best game in a long time. That's still, like you said, that's found money, but just let it, you don't have to then go and try and double it at the blackjack
Yeah,
table, right?
it's like
Like,
he did that prior to the fourth quarter. Like you
right.
could have said, okay, Terry's had his game. And
Yeah.
again, like I'm like not. I've been one of the last people on the Terry Rozier ship before. I am not even fully off. Like I'm not. I'm not of the opinion that he needs to be out of the rotation. But you know, 15 minutes is a really good time on the court. Like
Yep.
that's great time to make an impact, be an offensive little microwave for us. Um, but yeah, I think Ware definitely should have those minutes down the stretch. I agree with you 100%. He has to have that opportunity to develop because we need him on an accelerated development path, not one where we had other bigs to play in the meantime. We don't have that. We shipped out Thomas Bryant. Kevin Love really just, he's been, did his best for us, really kept us, helped try to keep us in that Cleveland game.
Hmm.
But he's like, he just only has so much he can do in a given season with his knees and his
Hmm.
very
Yeah.
old body. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think one thing that's worth celebrating, we should probably talk about, is Bam has had quite the week of basketball.
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about Bam for sure. I think that's definitely a good jumping point. So, Bam, I believe over the 7 game stretch is averaging about 25, 10, and 4, which is like peak Bam, super efficient. And I, I mean, obviously the jumper's falling, right? Like that's a
Hmm.
huge part of this. When the jumper falls for Bam, that's going to make everything else kind of sing. But his aggression, his shot selection, he's still taking threes, he's still getting to his floater. He's had some great rim attacks, and then the players he's doing this against. I mean, he's being guarded by OG Anunoby, Evan Mobley, the Minnesota guys always had one of their better defenders on them. And then in the matchups where a team doesn't have a good defender, like Washington or whoever, like he's making sure to still punish them. What's been your favorite aspects of Bam's recent stretch?
The shot volume for sure. I think this is everything that everybody was asking for, which, I'm trying to keep this positive, but it does make me sad that we lost these games because it reminds me when Tyler was on a heater at the beginning of the season and we were still losing. It was like, come on, they're doing what we asked them to do. Why can't we still win these games? But truly, just the confidence that he's gone out there. I think the circumstances really required it because, Tyler was out at some point. Wiggins was out. Ware was out. We've got all these injuries that popped up this week. People were in and out of the lineup. He knew that like he had to be the guy consistently and just showing that he can step up and do that. I hope that allows him to kind of ride that momentum going through the rest of the season. I think over the last 5 games, like 17 shots, 21 shots, 18, 16, 16. I'd love to have him just right there at like that 18 shot mark and higher. And
No,
put up 20 shots. I don't care. Who else is going to take it? Like if you don't take
right.
those shots, somebody else is going to take them. And
Tyler will get his. You don't have to worry about that.
Tyler's going to find 30 shots somehow throughout the
Yeah,
night. Like
yeah.
you
And
can
and
do it.
and Wiggins and Duncan are benefits of Bam's aggression. So
Hmm.
I think it totally makes sense. I pulled up NBA.com has a cool thing where it'll like filter a guy's field goal attempts and what he's shooting percentage wise from different areas on the court. So over the last, I believe this is over the last 7 games, Bam is shooting 64% from 8 feet and in. So all his floaters, everything around the basket, but maybe even crazier, from 8 feet to 16 feet, he's also shooting 64%. So,
Golly.
and you can
Elite.
tell, like the
Hmm.
confidence, like he's
The
holding the
rhythm.
follow through. Yeah, and even late shot clock. He like it's hard to describe it exactly, but when he looks at the shot clock and there's 5 seconds left, sometimes you can tell he's like, okay, how do I get to my DHO? And lately he's like, all right, hezzy tween time. I'm getting into this pull up and I'm confident it's going in.
Dude, need
And
more of it. Need
yeah.
those shots in the fourth quarter too. That is the one thing. Is like I want to see Bam more aggressive still in the fourth quarter. Like
Hmm.
it's still deferring sometimes, and even in that like overtime loss to the Knicks, like he was on fire through the whole game, and then just kind of not disappeared. He's obviously doing a lot out there, especially on
Hmm.
the defensive end, but offensively, just not getting to any kind of shots and even in those dribble handoffs, like we just end up just 1, 2 passes into a 3-point shot, which is like a good look for our guys sometimes. Like they don't
Hmm.
they don't need a lot of space to make their shots. They make high difficulty shots, but Bam just has an actual bag that he can get to, and I'd love to see that in the fourth quarter. And I'd much rather live and die by that than just chucking threes at the end of a game.
Yeah, you saw that I thought a lot with Chicago zone. Also, I
Hmm.
think it's so embarrassing the Heat looks so bad against the zone since they play it so often.
We practice it so much.
Yeah, and like so Chicago goes in the zone and there are so many possessions for I'm not exaggerating, I don't think 3 or 4 seconds no one moved. It was like everybody was like, "Okay, what should we do? And then Bam would flash to the middle, and those were the best possessions. But a lot of those zone reps ended up being, swing, 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 catch and shoot three for Davion, or catch and shoot three for Haywood. And it's like, yeah, that's an okay shot, but when Chicago's on an 8-2 run and everybody's kind of stressed and really wants that response, you rather it go through Bam or go through Hero, somebody you
Hmm.
feel a little more confident. And that's the design of the zone, right? I mean, that's why the Heat play it. It gets the balls out of the star players' hands, and you just get kind of a half contested, catch and shoot three, and you live with the results and try and push off of misses. So that was something, another example where Bam just getting in the middle and operating would be helpful. And yeah, and Kalel, like we talked about, he would hurt the spacing a little bit, but so much of Bam's game is predicated on the mid range. Like if you look at
Hmm.
cleaning the glass in terms of mid range frequency for a center, Bam's like 99th percentile. Like he takes so many mid range for his archetype. So I mean, spacing doesn't impact that. That's usually isolation or off a little, short roll screen. So yeah, I think it's very important for Bam to try and emphasize himself. And I'm not saying that in terms of like, oh, it's all up to Bam. Like the coaching staff or different players could feature him. But also I mean, everyone, even, Kendrick Perkins of all people for the Cleveland game was like, Bam Adebayo needs to be more aggressive. And it's like, that's almost like his second last name needs to be more aggressive. Like it's, I feel
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
everybody
that's been
says that.
something ever since, people really started to understand what kind of player he could be on a night to night basis. I think everybody's just looking for that more often. And again, he's having great games in the grand scheme of the game across 4 quarters, but clearly we have an emphasis that needs to be made on how we execute the end of the game, and there just has to be changes. It's not like he needs to put up 30 shots in the fourth quarter. Like even 3 more shots in the fourth quarter takes away 3 random shots we took, just random 3-point chucks. Like that is something I would just like to see moving forward. I want to harken back and also say in that zone, Khalil Ware might have been really nice there, just as someone who can
Hmm.
be in the middle. He doesn't even have to flash to the middle. He's 7 feet tall. Throw the ball to him and we can go from there. Like they have
Yeah.
to react to
And the
that.
zone's very susceptible to offensive rebounding. We really only do that when Kalel's out there. So that could be another way he could hurt teams. Another shout out I feel like we should give, even though the Bulls game was a little bit of a struggle, Duncan Robinson.
Hmm.
We've talked a lot on this show about how we want Duncan to start because he plays so much better when he starts, plays better with Bam. Well, recently he has been coming off the bench and really excelling. What have you liked from what you've seen from Duncan recently?
I just like the volume again. Another guy that I want to be a volume shooter on this team. I don't care that you only made 2 last night against the Bulls. Keep shooting 10 threes. I do not care. Like we will only win if you do that. And so he had the 10, he had 7 before that, 8, 7, down to 6 before that. Like I just want those shots going up. Like it's what you do. It has an impact whether you make it or miss it. Like the defense has to react to you only if you're shooting. Once you stop shooting, by the fourth quarter, they realize you're not really going to have an impact on this game, and teams start doing different things. But I've loved the aggression I've seen from him through some of our victories, like and the shots he's been able to make, and they're tough shots. Like I always want to give credit to Duncan because what I'm asking him to do is crazy. Like I'm asking you to take 10 contested threes that people are definitely going over screens on and double teaming you on. Like I don't care, shoot them anyways. You won't ever get flack from me for missing a bunch of threes. You know, like I know it's hard what you do and it requires a lot of skill, but I still want to see him putting those shots up. And so when those do go up, I think good things happen. And I feel like he's been able to make an impact. And I think since the last time we talked, in which he was kind of indecisive when it came to, what he was going to do with the ball, I've seen a little bit more confidence in him. Maybe sans the last game. But just throughout the week, I feel like him get into, his dribble and getting to the rim or passing out of the dribble handoff and things of that nature. Like a little bit more decisiveness from him has been good. I think he has thrived coming off the bench. And I think he just works with everything really. Like I know for him, I think it's a bit of a confidence thing. In and out of the season, but overall, I do think his archetype of a player can work with any kind of lineup we throw out there with our current roster construction, so long as he's actually taking those shots. But what have you
Hmm.
seen from Duncan? How are you feeling about him after these past few performances?
Yeah, really encouraged. He looks really confident shooting the three. You and I talked about a few episodes ago where it's like, man, Duncan looks hesitant and his inside the arc game, he doesn't look really confident. Now, I mean, he's taking quote unquote bad shots and I'm all for it. I mean, he's launching very contested stuff. It's going in, so that's great. But you made a great point. It's good for the team when he's aggressive, even if they're not going in. So that's been awesome. But like with any, it's human nature, it feeds into his confidence of the rest of his game. He's putting it on the deck and hit some nice floaters recently. He's drawn a couple fouls, just looks more confident, throwing some good lobs to Bam off their DHO stuff when Duncan gets downhill. So he's looked great. I love the pairing of he and Haywood off the bench together. You get kind of that
Hmm.
instant offense and instant perimeter defense to kind of mesh with the starting group that stays in. They're usually Haywood and Duncan are the first two subs, and Duncan usually gets to play with Bam, so that's awesome. Haywood's three has kind of escaped him recently, so those
Yeah.
lineups would probably be more potent if Haywood was able to convert on those. But that's it's what you get with age. You're getting elite defense, and the nights where the shots go in, that's great. There's nobody I wants to be playing over him or something. I think he's in a good spot as far as what he's doing, and yeah, Duncan just defense has been solid enough. He knows how to play in the heat zone, but it's mostly just his shooting. He's averaging 16, 3, and 4 over the last 7. I mean, that's like six man of
That's
the
really
year type
nice.
numbers. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's been really cool to see Duncan do that. And again, I'm not sure he needs to close in clutch time just because we want to see Ware and Wiggins and you need Davion's defense.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be mad if they tried that too. And he has closed a couple clutch games, and it just gives you more of a threat. I mean, we saw in that Cleveland game, that one looked like it was over, and then Duncan hit that Hail Mary three,
Hmm.
and then we forced a turnover and had another opportunity to potentially send the game into overtime or win it. So been very proud of Duncan and how he's been playing lately. And we sound like Spo, but there have been positives lately.
Yeah,
It's
and I want to say like, actually, I think that's what I'd plan on opening the show with, as far as just how I've been feeling is like overall, this team has flashes of brilliance and then long stretches of mediocrity, which is a very painful thing to experience because you can see it right there on the court through games that we had no business being in, like against the Timberwolves, against the Cavs with only 9 players on the roster. Like these are tough games against really, really, really good opponents. And you can see out there that that doesn't necessarily matter to our team, which I always love about the Heat is that they don't really care who they're going up against. They're gonna give it their all for the most part. And there's going to be these flashes of brilliance where you can really see them ratchet it up on defense and get really hot on offense. And the ball is flowing and moving with energy, and they're diving after balls and full court press and, causing turnovers. Like things are happening in the right direction. We just don't have that over a consistent stretch of games. These are players I want to see on a future Heat roster. Like I like what we have. I won't go so far to say we have enough, but I like what we have. I just need it to work a little bit better. And I think it's capable of doing that. Like, I don't need these guys to really play above their station. I just need, I think, the sum of our parts to maybe equal a little bit more.
Right. And yeah, and when you build leads, that implies success.
Yeah.
And in theory, it should be replicable. You should be able to sustain success. And I think that's why this recent stretch has been a special brand, and maybe this recent season, you could say, has been a special brand of frustration for Heat fans.
Hmm.
Because it's not like after the first quarter they trail by 10 and they just lose by 10. It's they're up by 12, they're up by 15. Oh, it's tied. Oh, they lost. And
Yeah.
that's frustrating. We've talked on the show a lot about, reasons for that. But overall, I mean, they've blown leads, I believe they've blown more double digit leads than any other team. And that's going to be frustrating as a fan base, regardless of the reasons behind that. So, it's tough. One thing, this is just a kind of a random tidbit, but last night Chicago, I felt like was killing the Heat in transition. And Chicago
Yeah.
plays fast. Giddy's a good transition player, but I mean, there was that stretch, I believe, in the fourth quarter where there were, I think it was 3 straight Miami misses, or maybe 2 misses and a turnover, and it was
Hmm.
3 Chicago layups. And I was like, guys, like, and it's not like these are elite transition athletes. This is
Trey
like,
Jones.
yeah, Trey Jones was just like bumping guys and finishing. So it made me wonder. I was like, is this a one game thing or has this been a struggle? Per cleaning the glass, Miami is 22nd in the league in transition defense. And they were third or
Wow.
fourth last year. Like this, I mean, like well coached teams are usually just good at transition defense because it's really a systemic thing. It's like, okay, we make sure we don't crash the offensive glass, so we get back on defense. So when I saw they were 22nd, I was shocked because that's not like a, oh, Jimmy, isn't here, our transition defense is bad. Like you could definitely be better than 22nd no matter who's on
Yeah.
your roster. And that, I
Yeah.
mean, so I was floored by that. That is really concerning, and we're very far into the season. It's not like a small numbers thing. So I mean,
Hmm.
hopefully that'll get a little better, but this team should be better than that, just unequivocally. I mean, they're playing, Kalel, so like the bigger you play, the harder it is for you to get back in transition. But
Hmm.
still, 22nd it's unacceptable. So, hopefully more Davion and Wiggins, good defenders out there, good athletes will help with that. But this is not a team that can afford to give up easy baskets in transition. They just
Yeah.
have to find ways to not allow that to happen because that's, it's teams feeding off of their misses. And this offense struggles so much right now. They can't afford to give up easy ones.
Yeah, I agree. I think again comes down to execution there throughout the game, of course, but especially late game, like we saw against the Bulls. This is just unacceptable. Like just if you're gonna foul the, and it's also because a lot of those plays were like and one plays that Jones had
Mm-hmm.
there at the end where he bumped a guy, finished, and got the free throw. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully these guys can really ratchet it up going into the season. I think that's what Spo is talking about when he says, there's like these moments of beautiful basketball being played. Like I think we can all see what Spo is seeing as far as how this team would win. And it would just be a matter of them doing what they do well for 4 straight quarters. I don't have the solution, and I'm glad I'm not the guy that's paid to make them do that. But hopefully they can get those things together as we, look forward to these next 4 games we have. We got a busy week this week. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So Miami's next game is versus Charlotte. I don't mean to be dramatic, but they must win that game. I don't
Mhm,
I don't nothing I
yeah.
mean there's no real consequences. They can't trade anybody or anything. I don't think they're gonna fire Spo, but they gotta win that game because after that you then have the Clippers, the Celtics, and the Grizzlies. And I believe there's hard games after that. That's just when the week ends. So that's kind of what we look towards. So gotta pick up the Charlotte game. And in typical Heat fashion, if they somehow stole one from the Clippers or the Grizzlies, I wouldn't be shocked. Maybe they go 2-2 in this
Or
stretch.
Boston. Say Boston. Why don't you want to say
Maybe
Boston?
Boston. I see the
You
thing
don't
with
want to say.
Boston is they're the only team that we never catch. They'll never
Yeah,
take it easy on us. They'll
they'll
never be
never.
like, "Oh, this team they hate
They
us."
want to kill us. Derek White wants to put up 40 on us every single
Every
time.
time, every time. So, we'll see what happens going forward. We covered a lot there. Heat fans, we know, make sure you're taking your blood pressure medicine. There's some stressful games right now. Lino, was there anything else you kind of wanted to cover, talk about as far as this recent stretch or, play from different players, anything like that?
Nothing else I really wanted to cover. I am nervous. We're running out of games here down the stretch to really show that we can turn this around.
We
Like,
should probably talk about the seedings. All right, so
yeah.
just this recent stretch, I think was a 3-game losing streak, has dropped the Heat to ninth now. So
Mm,
the Heat are right in this mix with Orlando, Atlanta themselves, and then Chicago's a couple games back, but obviously they just gained a game on Miami last night. So that's going to be the mix. None of those teams, in my opinion, are catching the Pistons, so we don't need to worry about that. But as far as how that plan will shake out, I mean, as a Heat fan, you might say like, "Oh, worrying about the plan, that's silly." But let's be realistic. This is a play-in team, and we want to be seventh if we want to have a chance to make the playoffs. If you're a Heat fan, and you want to tank out of the playoffs. We've talked about why that's kind of silly because we need to forfeit this pick this year. If we miss the playoffs, we keep it, and then you get the 14th pick, and you have an unprotected pick in the future. So, in my opinion, that's what I'm rooting for as a Heat fan. Other than player development, just making the playoffs is the other main goal of this season. And I really think they'll need to be seventh or maybe eighth to do that. I think if we have to play a single elimination game against Atlanta in Atlanta, that's a very scary proposition.
Oh, and because we've beat them a couple times now, and them the Bulls, like they're not gonna just keep losing to us, especially without Jimmy. Like
Yeah,
eventually they're gonna catch us in one of these playing games, and this is the prime season for that to happen. So
yeah. And not to
it
mention Orlando. I mean, even if they're eighth, they'll have to play Orlando first. That's going to be extremely tough. Even Orlando's been struggling lately, but they've also had really strong stretches this
and
season.
strong games against us as well.
Yes, yeah. So
Yeah,
that yeah, they need to sharpen up.
but I will say, if we get the Cavs in the first round, I feel pretty good
About winning.
about winning, maybe like 2 games.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think so. They're a young playoff team.
Look, man, we took them to the wire with 9 players the other day,
That was
and they
cool.
needed that game to clutch the playoffs. So that was like important
Yeah,
for them.
yeah. That
We
was
could
a.
we could pull something out.
We'll see. We'll see. It's going to be an interesting stretch. There's not a lot of games left. There's about a month of the season basically to go. So we'll be with you for every bouncing basket, as Eric Reed says. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. We will be back next week to cover hopefully a couple of victories over this next stretch. Check us out on all the social media platforms. Please comment, like, subscribe on YouTube. Leave us some feedback. Let us know if there's any specific things you want us to talk about or any things you agree or disagree with us on. We always appreciate hearing from anybody out there. And for myself, Micah, my good friend Lino, we'll talk to you guys next time. Thank you for tuning in.